thanks so much for making the rain and coming and joining us here at Elliott Book Company. Just a reminder to close and turn off electronics, all satellites, etc. that you may or may not have. This afternoon, we are pleased to have with us two poets with their latest collections of poetry, as well as featuring 2x squared novella. We'll begin with Leonard Schwartz. He is a faculty member at Evergreen State College in Olympia and a radio host on a brief hiatus, but will be coming back for cross-cultural poetics. He joins us today with his latest collection of poetry, At Elements. Please help me welcome to the stage Leonard Schwartz.
Thank you, Alex. I wonder, do we really need the microphone today?
If you want it, or you can just...
Maybe we do need it. Maybe someone's recording it. It's helpful. So, thank you for coming. It's really good to be at Elliott Bookshop in the bookstore in the new space. And this book, At Element, has a November publishing date, so I want to thank Ed Foster for getting it here early so that we can have it on hand. It's a collection of poetry from the last couple of years, most of the time. This kind of back and forth I have between Olympia, Washington, and New York, and sort of plays a little bit with that kind of bicoastalism. I'm going to read two earlier poems and then spend the rest of the time from the reading on a longer piece entitled The Sleep Talkers, which I'll say a little bit about when I come to it. The first piece I'm going to read is entitled Flashlight. How, hiker, pick out a route that ascends from the human body to the rest of the universe? Work up from twig to worship of the tree god? Irate sea to total emotive range the ocean evokes? Most literal level to smell of smoke, seasoned especially to advance that burning single question. From the path chosen comes its valley of association, non-place in the throes of active combat. Associations cohere there, bodies cannot. And if our nightmare is a culture inhabited by post-humans, the hand holding the flashlight shaking heavily, then this sleepless sleep on borrowed horses through storms of solitude exists as to shift the underlying set of pornographic practices. Echo, here you are again. The denser your truth, the more emotion in the trace, and every defeat eternal. Are we the hopeless or the ones who give hope? The clumsy key to the senses or the river's glassy surface? It makes no distinction between music and language. This noumenal thing that talks to itself all the time in practices infancy's politesse, all the while dwelling in the tense of these rhythms, now full of speech, now quiet as an apple. Time is not something objective and natural. They don't have more of it in the neighboring cottages. Also, a more ample alphabet promises more than ours can shape, and some alternative negotiation in which lyric and libido exchange auras amidst low chuckles and playful vows. It is said that after a huge oak goes down, hit by a lightning bolt, irony goes out of fashion, and a theory of resistance is custom designed for the lion, for the fox, for the ram. A flag draped over a porch, an overpowering discourse is not a discourse, and a threadbare discourse is something a child learns to believe in only very, very reluctantly. This is a piece entitled Exchange. I should mention that the book is in memory of Robert Blazer, the great poet of this area, stretching from Vancouver, British Columbia, down through the Pacific Northwest, who died just a couple of years ago. And at some level, it was a kind of muse for me in this book. So B was cross-eyed. As the words flowed endlessly from his mouth, it appeared that he might be talking to the walls. I decided that he was talking to me, although it took 7 years to come to that decision, as everything that we call knowledge is based in memory, sensation, and perception, settling into sentences. When I first met B, I thought to myself, this guy is fun. Enjoy him while he lasts. He won't live long. All that apparently unprotected sex, the Times Square gigolos, the crack he said he was smoking, and so on. 20 years later, B is not only alive, but just last week, he gave me a foot massage. It was a memorable locking of the eyes, one that overcame all the restrictions of our exchange, a longing set aside by sight and an embrace. But the circumstance dictated that she then had to continue walking past. I wasn't wistful. I took renewed pleasure in the memory of the feline narrowing of her eyes on another occasion, and that lioness-like kiss. C took me into his confidence. He gave me something indefinable. His words on the page were a pride of lionesses, hunting down the body's refusals. But alas, they devoured the body too. His spoken words, spoken to me alone, were filled with an exaggerated woe that intimated always an expectation of the ecstatic. Nowadays, I borrow some of Kay's lines, like the one that goes, I contradict myself because I speak. And I think about the way Kay speaks with such inner consistency. R was an old man when I came to know him, older than C, older than Kay, filled with language and sorrow, but of the many languages he spoke, none could speak his sorrow. His mournful gaze seemed to say this to me, his useless heterosexual apprentice. R lent me his Paris apartment filled with paintings of variable worth. Later he grew angry with me, I would say Lear-like, from the distance of a rented residence in Spain, or so I was told by G, who I knew disliked me. Yet it was true that R's next letter was not friendly. I found it amazing that I was so young when all this happened. R and I shared a delirium, though I disappointed him by not even holding hands. I should say he confirmed for me my own delirium, and I am grateful. I know far fewer languages still have hopes to learn to speak. R never gained the domestic bliss of D, the myth of the hearth, the intensely intimate domestic life. Am I capable of cherishing the minutiae of the conjugal relation, of finding in that minutiae the minutes of lived experience, the actual, in the actual, a mode of celebration? B is far more frantic than R or myself, spends everything he has, emotionally and financially, in love's pursuit. V has a similar thorn in the flesh, though she likes to pretend it isn't there, that she will pluck it out at some future date, or that one particular lover will remove it for her as from a lioness's paw. C laughed at all human folly, and at the same time set me up with a beautiful young Italian editor. We sat in his small 6th arrondissement flat, C and his friend, me and the editor. She wasn't interested. Years later, she turned up again as B's editor in France. He didn't like her, I'll call her S, and mocked her in the most sarcastic terms. C laughed at all human folly and took me for walks in the Luxembourg Gardens, and the memory of those walks still stirs me. I don't think Kay really thought I would amount to much, and it is true at that age that I was obnoxious and withdrawn and didn't learn to be with people at all till much, much later. I would like to edit R as Uncollected, and perhaps will ask the publisher I know if she might be willing to take on the project. D counseled fullness over purity, and wrote to me that the word purity would flame once I saw the word fire in it. So I'm going to read 4 sections from a piece entitled The Sleep Talkers. I became very interested in trying to write from sleep, or write, or think about sleep as a mode of thought that might generate writing. My wife, John R., had pointed out at one point that sleep isn't a form of rest. It's when the body is recharging, is energizing, the closest one comes to death on a daily or nightly experience would be the experience of exhaustion or tiredness, where parts of the brain are literally shutting down, and that sleep is this rise, this period of rising up, which we generally don't have access to. So sleep, but not dream. We know about dream, at least rhetorically, or a poet, in terms of poetics. There's narrative and image that are thought of as ways of rendering dream. Dream is some kind of narrative logic and has very striking images to it. What would a mode of writing that attempted to operate from sleep, which is outside of, obviously, our can produce in terms of writing? I don't know. I wasn't trying to literally write from sleep, train myself to write from sleep, but work the thought of sleep into something other than simply rest or a metaphor for death. So I'll read a few sections from the Sleep Talkers. I am writing to you. Took me long enough to figure that one out. Then again, I became aware of you only recently. You will perhaps not believe me when I write that all this is new, but it's true. For most of my life, I was incapable of conceiving of you, of perceiving you, of sensing you passing just outside my ken. And certainly it never dawned on me that I was supposed to write to you in order to draw you nearer. Oh, I might have guessed in certain lucid moments that writing was the sixth sense, the synesthesia of the identifiable five, the one which shaped this I in my primary launch. But I never grasped for whom language was intended. Thus all the writing I have done before this was preparatory to this new openness, to this fundamental address. I'm at the beginning, finally, thanks to you. When I speak to you, I speak of you. When I speak of you, I speak to you. Nowadays, what do I speak of to you? Day and night, I speak to you of sleep. The great bonfire of sleep into which all our ideas pass, in which all our living burns. The kindling for which I now believe are these tentative gestures, the very desire to write, to live in language, that absence as deep as sleep. You respond, or zzz, after which there is no response, or else it's back to the letter A. My suspicion is, in fact, that all my speech is merely your kindling. To sleep, the face of vulnerability, the sign of trust, you who are not a god, working the magic around the mind that makes me part of you, in effect, outside myself, when most alone. Sleep has its god, and I make my offerings, but you are what the god guards, the one he keeps, the actual field at the point of igniting. So then, good night. Bonfire of sleep that is no fire. Outside that is actually an inside. Therefore, we are outside. It is the beach. It is the sea of sleep and its harboring sky. Beams of light falling on the foam. You have asked me to stay up again till this spectral hour. I am aware that I am not awake. I am aware that I write from the black of this page, which is the sleep in which no pronoun is absolute, in which all pronouns are frail boats without beam of light or sight of fire. It is oblivion that frightens us the most, which means the act of loss of memory, which is our fate. To sleep is to create a new language out of primordial ooze, to remember anew in the darkness before conscious individuation. 2. To sleep takes us way, way back, as far back as the most primordial, primitive animal forms. One might climb a tree in the forest, evolutionarily speaking, or dig down into the earth. Further back, I'm paddling in my boat. A young woman recently told me that for her sleep was like getting a shot. Sleep, a vaccine against exhaustion, or else a pill. To reclaim sleep from the purgatory we had made of it. To let me knit from the blackness my own weave to be your garment. Sleep deeper than dreams, not narrative and image, but waves of re-energizing thought, making their way to where I've paddled, not overwhelming me, and I'm back on the beach, warming myself beside burning branches. In fact, I am learning to write in my sleep. You let me do this from time to time. My address is to you. You do not speak in return, but you do permit me certain liberties. One's own absence to oneself can be frightening, can be cold, and yet to be self-identical would be even more frightening. No fear of that. I am lost in the forest of you. My brain is on fire. This is the sea. All mind is octopus sliding through the tiniest cracks, expanding to encompass with its suckers the great mass of the night. But even this octopus, this mind, is lost in the ocean of your night, your mass. In the forest, in the sea, you hold me to my promise to remain alert. Alert to danger, yes, but also to something other. Alert to a certain tenderness of forest and sea. Tenderness that isn't in the forest or in the sea, but in you and me, your contribution. Sleep's sometimes sweetness. To sleep is a kind of chorus. I write in my sleep to you who rise in my thoughts, who kindle my speech. Sleep, a nightly mystery. 3. It is worth my attempting to apprehend this mystery, especially since no one else will help me to apprehend it. Out of the ravine of the impossible, powering up the mountainside, the prestige of the instant predicated on reverberations in stone, outside of any measure the brain can trust. If one never learns to limn what is known, one never learns what can't be taught, only what is said, which would seem to speak against speech and in favor of silence. But in fact, there comes instead a silence filled with words, in other words, senility. Senility, that mockery of sleep, that feverish silence, would pay to keep my voice, but certain silences can be bribed. They are deeper than we are, sleeping among secrets, secrets themselves, but secrets that are empty of content. Light and sound bait and switch us, but silence is only itself without a face. I give silence my face, fail in silence, though not without continuing to seek out lights and sounds worth trying to encounter. And when that fails, I can only accept your silence, which means I must speak. At twilight, maple and fir seemed frantic to tell me something. They must have been frantic, what with all that gesturing, all those senile branches, waving in terror, proffering a message of beware, beware of the silence that follows silence, the gust which comes after the wind. By morning, most of the trees had returned to their living quiet. Such mornings preserve us from categories that drain time, whirling to catch a glimpse of one's own light fading on the horizon. If cut open a book suggests a pomegranate, I have little chance of any such honeycombed access to myself. Words are at least partly present. There was a storm. It is over. We lost 2 trees. And I'll end with one last section from the Sleep Talkers. Section 21. So going from 3 to 20. The father's ghost returns to haunt the son. It is one of the most familiar tropes in Western literature. Why? Well, why not? Don't we want the father's ghost to visit the son? The parent, in spite of having passed away, still present to his grown child? Perhaps in this case, that isn't such a good thing, since the voice of the father urges the son to cherish the hatred he has bequeathed him. Yes, hatred is the son's patrimony. You see, the father felt unloved and unhappy during his life. He was incapable of either love or happiness himself. Now he asks his son to love him, to demonstrate this love through his actions. The father, by definition, could not love his son, but now he asks his son to love him, which is unreasonable. And he asks his son to do what he urges him to do out of love, which is also unreasonable. But the father also urges the son to be strong, and these are words the son wants to hear. The son wants to be strong. His body jerks with the anticipation of his own increase in power. He is like a teenager flexing to demonstrate the power of his form, his own burgeoning capacity to destroy. The father wants the son to destroy his enemies posthumously, which is why he urges his son to be strong. The son wants to be strong, but does he really want to destroy all his father's enemies? His life to this point has been expressive of resentment. but not a vendetta. His plans for the future do seem to coincide with that of his father. They reek of blood. Good news. The father reveals the relative weakening of he and his son's enemies, and forecasts his and his son's enemies' coming defeat, if only the son will listen to the father's urgings. It should be mentioned at this point that the son may be asleep during the entire conversation with his father. This may be one of the oldest tropes in Western literature. How is the son able to hear in his sleep? Shouldn't we rather say that the son's sleep is troubled by the ghost of his father? Or perhaps we should wonder if in fact the son is sleeping at all. Perhaps he is only pretending to sleep in the hope that if he remains in that posture, the ghost of the father will finally give up and go away. Perhaps he is awake and afraid that if he opens his eyes, he will be frightened by what he sees. It is also true that the son speaks in his sleep, if he really is asleep, as if responding to his father's words, or is pretending to speak in his sleep, if he really is awake. Either way, the son speaks of his own unhappiness. The son mentions his mother. The son wonders aloud about his own chances in life. "Are you asleep, my son? Are you asleep, my son?" repeatedly asks the ghost of the father. See, the father isn't sure either if his son is awake or asleep. The son seems to be responding to the ghost of the father, but not to the degree that the ghost of the father can be certain that the son is listening or even awake. The son speaks as if in retort to the father's exhortations, but the ghost of the father remains uncertain. The son seems to be saying that he will do as his father asks. Or rather, the son seems to be saying that he will do what the father wants, but only for himself, not for the love of the father. Yes, he will do. Yes, he will do it. Destroy their enemies, but only for himself. That ambition, however, to destroy their enemies, would probably be enough to satisfy the ghost of the father, oriented as he is towards destruction, and not any pleasure in the son's love or obedience. When she awakens, she knows herself to be different than she was before. In the very first movements after waking, this is clear to her. In the stretching of her limbs, it should be clear to any of us who knew her before that now she is other. And then she is overwhelmed by her joy in waking, and she forgets for a while that she is different. She exults, and she is who she was, and she is who she is. The curve of the earth hugs her. The light moves her, moves from her and through her. Lineage flames in her eyes. She is alive, and that is her lineage. She is enthusiastic and noble, and that is her lineage. And of her own accord, she is wise. She is awakened from a long sleep. It must have been years. She exults in waking. And yet she is not fully awakened, and that is part of her wisdom. She is aglow with her dream life to such a degree that we may say she is still in that dream, still of that dream. Her face is so rich with the gold of her slowly moving slumber that we may say she still slumbers, if slumber means degree zero of unconsciousness, rising blush of unconsciousness, active in the world, the depths of one's breathing. Indeed, her lungs are strong. You see, she sings. She sings her greeting to earth, to sun, to seed and egg. She sings her gratitude to earth, to sun, to seed and egg. She is very much alive, so very much awake, so very much every breath she draws from the depths of the deepest sleep known to the species. At which point she wonders what awakened her, or who. Later, this what, or who, it is a who, will become a source of recognition and of anxiety, of dread, of mortal attraction, pinning her to her new identity. Very soon she will know herself to be different than she was before. Very soon she will feel the pressure to become what she already is, a mortally attractive and attracted being. She will not wish to depart from who she was. She will not desire to split with her sleep. It will take a terrific effort on her part to realize that she does wish to leave that sleep behind, to will herself to believe that life is with the others and not with the images that populate her thought, the self-image that fashions her song, the divinity that bathes her and her body. That will all come soon enough. For now she wakes singing. For now she is both awake and asleep, both asleep and awake, from whence she sings both with clarity and the inchoate. Baudelaire writes that in China they tell time by looking into the eyes of cats. An absurd and beautiful sentence and otherness saturated in something other than the clock, like her waking. If one looks into her eyes just after waking, one sees the spark of light, spark of stone, spark of seed and egg, hieroglyphs of some time transcendental in its words. Thank you.